Thanks so much for having me here. Thanks to all of you for hanging out on a Sunday afternoon. Great cup day, no less. And for sitting here listening to me. I'm really grateful to the TEDx organizers for having me, putting on a great show, and also for having me in such a stellar lineup of speakers. And I'm not just saying that. As a matter of fact, when I listened, I felt kind of intimidated, in part because they gave such really inspirational and positive talks. And I hope I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I'm afraid I might let you down a little bit. My talk is probably going to be a lot more preachy and depressing than it is inspirational, although somewhere in there's a comment of hope and optimism and so on. And the reason I tell you this is because, like everybody else, we're supposed to come forward and talk to you for 18 minutes about our life and what makes us tick. And this is where I got to start off, sort of like an Alcoholics Anonymous session. My name is Arne, and I'm a historian. It's been 7 days since I last read my book on Adolf Hitler. Mine is the world of death and destruction. I teach 20th century international relations, so I teach pretty much nothing but death and destruction, civil war, revolution, conflict, all sorts of really horrendous things that don't really lend well to positive talks. I suppose I should teach something about puppy dogs and ice cream and stuff like that, but I don't. Now, having said that, I must tell you that my domain is also that of optimism and hope and progress and tremendous triumph of the human spirit. It really is all about those things. So I'm pitching to you my courses. Yes, you'll be mortally depressed and lose your hair, but at the end of it all, there's still hope for the future. And that's where I think they asked me to come and talk to you about the primacy of history, about how we need to command, how we need to know history in order to move forward. And to help me with this, and I hope this thing is working well. Is it working well? Nope. I'm going backwards. There it is. See, I hate technology. The organizers have done just a wonderful service to me by giving us in our little pitches what ACT meant. And I read this and I went, well, that's history. That's what we do. Who better than boring historians to come along and talk about our existence in terms of cycles of action and reaction and what it all means to the future. So I went from sort of going, why are you asking me to come and speak when I'm so depressing, to sort of saying, well, this is really our domain. Who better than historians to do it? And this morning, my very, very dear friend Tony Conti came and gave an amazing speech. I love Tony. Bald men rule the world. We all know this. He also wore a purple shirt. We didn't plan it, but there you go. And Tony gave a fantastic talk in which he dared you. And I love this. I said, my God, that's what I should do. I should dare you. He dared you to care. He dared you to get involved. He dared you to laugh. And he dared you to twirl. Tony, this is for you. There you go. I twirl. Thank you very much. I twirl for Tony. Yeah. I'm actually kind of winded right now, so I might have to sit down. That's most exercise I've had in a very long time. And I'm going to dare you too. I'm going to dare you to actually understand and to command history. Now, history can be dreadfully boring and unbelievably hard, I admit this. But what we've done in our society is to sort of forget how really central it is to our existence, the underpinning of virtually everything we are individually and collectively, and that's where I want to come to you today. I'm going to dare you to understand history, and by extension, to dare you to empathize with the rest of the world in places where history is more prevalent, is in your face, as I always put it. And therefore, I dare you to make the world a much better place. That's the hope and optimism that I share. Now, I'm going to come to it by a kind of long way, an assault on the education system. Now, I'm a tenured professor, so everybody should remember that. You can't fire me from what I'm about to say. Sheldon, I'm talking to you. I'm actually thinking here about the education system in its totality, not a particular place, certainly not Ryerson, which frankly I think is one of the best schools on the face of the planet. But I do, absolutely, give it up. And I tell you this in no uncertain fashion because as a national crisis, I'd even put it as an international crisis, we have forgotten the role of history. So I'm going to give you two sort of main pillars of what I want to talk about. First and foremost, we need to put a greater emphasis on arts and humanities in education. Now, I have to tell you this because, yes, I'm an arts and humanities guy. I love other stuff too, and I understand their importance, business, commerce, engineering, science, I know. But the fact is that somewhere along the last 20 years, we've taken arts and humanities, the underpinning of the societies in which we live, the way we think, our legal constructs, politics, economics, everything, and sort of put it on the back shelf because it's somehow not marketable, not important, incidental, or whatever else. That's a travesty. And second of all, I would say we need to reform, we need to go out there and to make for many more experiential learning components of our education, to build, if you like, an international education where we kick our students' butts and make them go live and work overseas. Those are the two main things I want to try to convince you today about the primacy of history. And I do this in no uncertain fashion. This is not an idealistic dream. I'm certainly not a hippie. You could probably figure that out for yourselves. I'm not a hippie. I have very pragmatic considerations. First and foremost, we're at war. I hate to sound dramatic, but we're at war as educators. We're at war with apathy and with ignorance. Of the two, apathy is far more dangerous, in my opinion. You can educate people. You can tell them stuff about the world. You can put them through exams and tests and so on, no problem. But it's actually making them care about the outside world, to actually engage them in this collective enterprise we call humanity. That's a much more difficult proposition. And I'd put it to you that the two are intertwined and that we're constantly at war and will always be at war with these two things. But I put it to you even more pragmatic considerations that we need to fight these things. We need to reform along the ways I suggest because of three principal issues, very pragmatic issues. First and foremost, ignorance really sucks. It really does. Being stupid is nobody's friend. And what it really concerns me more about being stupid about history in particular is that it prevents us from being empathetic. And if we can't empathize with other people around the world, how on earth can we understand and help them? Canadians pride themselves on being global citizens, of being do-gooders and sort of power brokers. I just don't see it anymore. We're losing our edge because primarily we don't talk about things like history. Secondly, I'd put to you that Canadians, along the lines of experiential learning, talk endlessly about how we're really international. We're not. We're really not. The world comes to Canada, that's true, but I'm not so convinced Canadians go out to the world. Places like Germany, Australia, Sweden, they have an emphasis on international education. They kick their kids out, make them go get worldly experience, and I think that helps them competitively. Now, at the heart of all this is my third point. It's about economic, political, and even economic competitiveness. We're not that competitive if we're not stressing the complexities of the world, the dynamics of things like history. If we're not emphasizing this, we're losing our edge. And at the heart of all this, as a historian, I get preachy. I warned you, it's preachy and depressing. We're an ahistorical society. And what's that mean is that we sort of put history on a shelf. It's now more the domain of kind of trivial pursuit, of bar quizzes and stuff like this. It's a cabinet of curiosities more than it is something that's in our face every day that we actually internalize. And I know why. I live here too. We live in an unbelievably safe democratic society for the most part, one which is increasingly affluent, no matter how much we pretend otherwise. And as a result, history can sort of be put on the back burner. We don't live with it. It's not in our face. I understand this. Actually, I'm a big fan sometimes of forgetting about history because it's painful. You can't live in the past, and you shouldn't live in the past. We need to think about progress and future and humanity and all of these wonderful things that aren't necessarily where you want to be if you're thinking about history. But here's the problem. The problem is that in the rest of the world, history is every day. History is in the face of people. I'm thinking about right now as we speak, as I speak, there are folks in Syria and Sudan and in Burma who live with the great weight of history upon their shoulders. History for them isn't some abstraction, it's some sort of remote idea. It's a real burden, it's a real problem. And we do no service to ourselves or to the rest of the world if we live in this ahistorical society and convince ourselves that history is unimportant. So, the great American poet Walt Whitman said it far better than I ever could. History's not was, it's is. You are history, personally, and in every other sense. We are all history. We're here in a historical building. This is not an abstraction, and yet somehow we've managed to sort of put it back there as if it is. And where I get really troubled is that we've littered the way, if you like. We've put these obstacles in our path to convince ourselves that history is unimportant. There's a great lie. I don't know who started it, but I'd like to meet them in a not very nice way. A great lie that somehow you can't get a job with history or humanities in general. Canadian and American statistics, government statistics, just recently, I helped build our BA program here, so I tell you, it's very recent. They actually prove that the highest rate of job placements across the board come from students in humanities. No offense, about economics, business. And the reason shouldn't be lost on you. It's because students who study humanities, of course, learn how to be critical thinkers. They learned reasoned, objective, scholarly thought. They learn how to research. They learn how to speak well, how to think, how to listen. All of things which translate across a wide array of jobs. And so this is a great lie. What we've done instead is to allow history to become the domain of things like mythology. And in my business, the 20th century foreign policy guy in particular, mythology has substituted fact and truth as the sort of discourse for us all. And it's a horrible thing. I could go on and on, the mythologies. How do I do it? My favorites. The United States always fights war for oil. Absolute nonsense. It's utter sheer nonsense. Somewhere along the way, somebody convinced you this is true. Whether you like the United States or not is immaterial. Israel and the United States have always been good friends. Lie. Patent lie. And yet you see this as sort of the history of the world. Who's to blame? I'm to blame. All of us are to blame. As a matter of fact, we've made history kind of a grab bag. Politicians and academics sometimes reach in, pull out something they like, and discard the stuff that they don't. We use and abuse history, is the phrase that's really unfortunately true. And on top of that, we have basically done nothing to encourage ourselves to understand the tremendous complexities of history, how really angry and powerful history can actually be. We've done nothing along these lines. Now, who's to blame? I'm to blame. Like I said, I do sound bites in the media. I turn horribly complicated events into 30-second sound bites. Well, Peter, what the problem is this. We all do this. And we've, in effect, done it to our education system. In 4 years, it's quite easy for students to come through and never take a humanity or an arts course or take them very superficially at best. That's a great tragedy. I wonder what we're doing. I think we're commodifying education to the point that if we continue, we're basically teaching our students to view education as a sort of 4-year degree and a piece of paper to go out in the world. My attitude is the worse it gets, the easier we make it for students to do that, the more likely it is that we should stand in the subway station and hand out degrees to whoever walks by. There's no longer a sort of intense adversarial nature. Sometimes it is adversarial. You don't have to like your profs. Lord knows that's true of probably everybody in my classroom, but they should be challenging you. And it's not students' fault necessarily, it's our fault. It's very easy for profs to mark from, I always make fun of multiple guess exams because I hate them so much, but also sometimes we just don't teach at all. Sometimes administrators and educators have divorced themselves from undergraduate teaching. We sort of somehow found it convenient to focus more on scholarship. Big fan of scholarship. You have to publish or perish, as the saying goes. And I'm a big fan that they're mutually reinforcing. Writing, good scholarship, and teaching are inseparable. But the problem is that increasingly at universities, undergraduate teaching has been diminished. It's sort of an afterthought. It's a consideration that's sometimes unpalatable for educators, instead of being an unbelievable joy and pleasure. I mean, every day I'm amazed that they actually pay me to come and to teach to wonderful, gifted students. Sometimes those students are dreadful and fail the course. It's true. Sometimes it's true that they shouldn't probably be in the first place, but they're there to try and to learn. And we've somehow lost our bearings. Not all the way, but we've lost our bearings in making education more about understanding primary issues like history, philosophy, English, languages, and so on. And as a result, I'm worried about what we're producing, if you like. And this is a whole-scale and very nasty attack, as you can probably imagine. I would argue that our lack of understanding and our lack of empathy, therefore, is a central component of many conflicts in the world. I'm not blaming us here in the West or in Canada or Ryerson more specifically for major problems in the world. But when we don't understand history and we don't care about other people's history, how on earth are we global citizens? How on earth are we contributing to remedying these manifest problems that we all face? That's my great assault. And secondly, to go back to my earlier point that I have two major pissy attacks, as I say, always full of vinegar, as I always am, is this lack of experiential learning. We do not encourage our students to go out enough. Now, I have been blessed at this university to have created and to continue to mentor, as Sid mentioned, a group called the Alternative Spring Break, which is just one example of many wonderful experiential learning opportunities on campus. We send students out overseas to do good works in developing states, places like Kenya and Vietnam and so on, building schools and roads and so on. I tell the students bluntly, I'm a very blunt guy, you're not going to save the world. You're going to save yourself. In some small measure, you're working to save yourself from apathy and ignorance, our two great enemies. And hopefully, along the way, hopefully, maybe that stimulates you to do even more, to get more engaged, more caring, more understanding about the world. I must tell you, and it's not because he's somewhere in the audience, Ryerson's actually on the leading edge of this stuff. And I'll tell you in no uncertain fashion, President Levy has been an enormous fan of this. He's supported experiential learning, and I love him for it, I really do. However, we need to do more. Not just here, but internationally, Canadians, of course, and then internationally, more about kicking your proverbial butts and getting you out to go overseas. I'm not talking about going and getting drunk on a beach in Mexico. That's not what that's your own business. I'll join you, but that's your own business, okay? What I'm talking about is experiential learning where you go, work, live, and study overseas. As a matter of fact, if you really want to know, If I were in a position of power, I would make it absolutely mandatory as part of your education that you spend at least 6 months or a year overseas in some place learning something about the world. Before you go get the 2.2 kids, the car, the condo in Mississauga, and buckle down for a nice, normal Canadian life. And the reason I do this is your own personal confidence would grow, our competitiveness would grow, you would return much more in the sense of empathy and understanding to the world community. This is one of the many reasons I will never be elected to public office. There's also a whole bunch of photographs, which will probably compromise at some point. But I must tell you, that's what I would do if I was. And I know your parents are going, oh my God, and administrators are going, oh my God, and politicians are going, kill that guy, because this is unrealistic. But the fact is, this is not just a sort of, haphazard example. It's an investment in our future if we actually view overseas education at this point. Now, to prove the point to you that this is not easy, and it's not a panacea, it's not a cure-all to be both smart and to travel, I decided in spirit of this talk to show you just a few images. I could have shown you many, but a few images that mean something to me, that make me tick for whatever major problems that I have. And it's here, a really horrible place called S21, better known as Tul Sen prison in Cambodia, Phnom Penh, Cambodia. In Cambodia, the greatest genocide proportionally in human history occurred in the 1970s. And you can go and you can see it. It's very untouristed. And you can literally walk in and feel death and destruction. Now, I've been to many places around the world. Death and destruction is my business. But when I went here, and I've been now many times, it actually smells like death. It smells like blood. You can see the images of people like this, perpetrators and victims side by side in one of the most sacred places on the face of the planet. And here are some of those images. And yeah, my job is to be uncomfortable, to provoke you into actually connecting with history. That's the point. We should connect with history no matter how far away it sometimes seems to us. And yeah, being sensational, if you like, is part of my enterprise because we do not connect anymore to the grand sweep of history. And here, the reason I show you these images in particular is because as I was going through photographing these for future classes, here are the isolation shells, here are the really horrific conditions that boggle the imagination, the bloodstains on the floor. This is what I saw at the very end. It shocked me. It made me go from being a relatively mild-mannered educator to being the mean SOB that you see in front of you now. Because somebody had the presence of mind to travel all the way to Cambodia, not exactly your main tourist destination, to even more, go inside this unbelievably monstrous place, which is not on the tourist path, incidentally, and yet still at the end of this blood and destruction, could only see fit to comment that they was here. Now, I've made it a lifelong mission to go after the chikis of the world, whoever they are, and to learn them something. Learn them something at least a bit of it, even if it sounds arrogant, to learn them something about history and about empathy, to empathize with people, to connect with them. And in the interests of doing this, it's not an abstract, it's not a sort of afterthought. It makes for a future, not just of Cambodia, but of us all, and a place where we'll all make this world an unbelievably better place if we actually take time to understand. And is it difficult? Is it hard? Are historians tough markers? Absolutely. But I'd put it to you this, that difficulty is the excuse that history and historians never accept. Thank you so much.